Good evening. Welcome to Reading Grounds. Tonight it is June 9th, 2019. I am Rob Oldham, or at least I'd like to think I am. Hope you're all having a good evening. Looks like Kimmery's first in the chat. Thanks for coming out, Kimmery. Always nice to hear from you again, to have your support. As far as Fairy Tale goes, yeah, we're probably going to keep going with that. Since I have figured out the magic of creating highlights while streaming on YouTube, which allows me to do small videos of exactly what I wanted to do. So hopefully from now on, I will be doing more readings on the stream. I'll probably devote the latter half of the stream after my break to just doing readings and then posting videos of that on the internet for anybody to pick up, and that way they don't have to sift through this whole spiel that I have. Let's take a look at Wikipedia's front page. The featured article for today is Mukhtar al-Thaqafi. I'm sure I'm butchering that. It was an early Islamic revolutionary. I'm sorry. It was a person who was an early Islamic revolutionary based in Kufa, who was alive circa 622-687. He led a rebellion against the Umayyads during the Second Islamic Civil War and ruled over most of Iraq for 18 months. Mukhtar had allied with the Mecca-based rival Caliph Abd Allah ibn al-Zubayr following Hussein ibn Ali's defeat at the Battle of Karbala, but returned to Kufa after Caliph Yazid's death. He declared Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya, son of Ali, to be the Mahdi, which I guess is an important figure in Islam. It took power in his name in 685 AD. In the news recently, in the Danish general election, center-left and left-wing parties win a majority, with Mette Frederiksen expected to become prime minister. In association, I don't care about association football. Brigitte Bierlein is named interim chancellor of Austria after a parliamentary motion of no confidence dismisses the government of Sebastian Kurz. James Marap is elected Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea following the resignation of Peter O'Neill. On the day of June 10th in history, during the Third Crusade in 1190, Frederick I, Frederick Barbarossa, drowned in the Salaf River of Anatolia. He was one of the Holy Roman Emperors. I'm curious about that, so I'm going to read a little more of his Wikipedia article on it. Pope Urban III died, was succeeded by Gregory VIII, who was more concerned with troubling reports from the Holy Land than with a power struggle with Barbarossa. After making his peace with the new pope, Frederick vowed to take up the cross at the Diet of Mainz in 1188. Frederick embarked on the Third Crusade, a massive expedition in conjunction with the French, led by King Philip Augustus and the English, under King Richard the Lionheart. According to one source written in the 1220s, Frederick organized a grand army of 100,000 men, including 20,000 knights, and set out on the overland route to the Holy Land. Some historians believe that this is an exaggeration. Other contemporary sources estimate an army of 12 to 15,000 men, including 3,000 to 4,000 knights. Okay, on June 10th, 1190, Emperor Frederick Barbarossa drowned near the Selifk castle in the Salif River. There are several conflicting accounts of the event. According to the chronicler Ibn al-Athir, Frederick was thrown from his horse and the shock of the cold water caused him to have a heart attack. Weighed down by his armor, he drowned in water that was barely hip deep, at least according to the Wikipedia article, although it looks like that exact account is a little disputed, that there isn't a citation for it. Sure makes for an interesting story, though. In 1786, a landslide dam on the Dado River caused by an earthquake 10 days earlier was destroyed by an aftershock, causing a flood that killed an estimated 100,000 people. In 1886, Mount Tarawera, a volcano in the North Island of New Zealand, erupted, killing up to 150 people, including the Waimangu Volcanic Rift Valley. In 1925, the United Church of Canada, the country's largest Protestant church, held its inaugural service in Toronto's Mutual Street Arena. In 1991, 11-year-old J.C. Lee Duggard was kidnapped in South Lake Tahoe, California. She remained a captive until 2009. Wow. That was 18 years later. Let's see here. Trying to see if there's anything else that's worth talking about, but I don't believe so. Yeah, looks like there's nothing else on the front page of Wikipedia I want to talk about. Now, last time on the stream, like I said, I finally figured out how to create highlights. So we're going to be going back to fairy tales. Hopefully do some other public domain stories. I did a reading of Desiderata, which is the poem. That's also been uploaded. Aside from that, I started a blog. There's a link to it in the description. I'm also going to put it in the chat. I mentioned it before, but today I finally have my first post because I have them scheduled for Sundays. That way I don't have to I have them scheduled so that they post automatically, and that way I don't have to keep going. I've also, between last week and this week, today I was able to finally customize it so that it actually looks more unique instead of just using one of the default backgrounds. It's just a picture that I've taken in some of my nightly walks, and I think it turned out. I like the aesthetic. It's a little weird, but so definitely check that out. I think you can follow it using RSS. Um, you can post it to your social media if you're really feeling crazy. You could do Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, whatever you feel crazy about. Um, Looks like Tyler's on the stream. Thanks for joining us, Tyler. I'm sure you've had quite enough of streams tonight, but I appreciate you showing your support for this one. But as I said, I have my blog. It's up and running now. It's got its first post. Um, Generally, I'm going to be using this blog as a chance to talk about writings and kind of my thoughts on certain books or movies. Not all of them will be reviews, but necessarily, but kind of more me talking about how the writing, what parts of the writing works and what part doesn't. Shelby's on. Thanks for coming on to the stream, Shelby. But right now, of course, as I said, I'm just talking about the blog. I do also have, it's under my real name instead of my nom de plume, but I have uh, I have my Twitter account. I'll be posting that one as well. But if you have a Twitter or you want to have some way to support me, definitely check out the blog, the Twitter, do whatever, because any traffic helps with exposure. And this time it's the exposure I'm not going to get arrested for, so that's always great. Let's see here. What else is there to talk about? Well, I suppose oh geez. I set the date wrong on the stream. But uh this past week we had D-Day, the 75th anniversary of Operation Overlord, which was the Allied powers landing on Normandy Beach and making their way into the front lines onto the Europe mainland in order to fight the Nazis and turn the tide of the war. Of course, history is always more complicated than we can easily surmise, but uh, well, of course it's an interesting event, even if you don't like history. I did write a paper on it for my history class. I'm going to see if I can pull that up real quick. I don't think I'll read the whole thing because I don't think it's that good, and to be honest, it's kind of depressing in general. Um, but let's see here. Yes, the story of Omaha Beach. It was considered the largest amphibious operation to ever be executed, involving not only watercraft but tanks and planes and the host of infantrymen. The operation was of such great risk that the United States President at the time, Dwight D. Eisenhower, carried a speech on hand specifically to address the operation's failure so that he could be ready to acknowledge it at any point. Despite this, the operation ultimately was a success. Something I didn't know until I wrote my paper was that the soldiers that were sent onto the beaches were deliberately consisted of young, inexperienced soldiers. Some of them were as young as 16 or 17. And this was deliberately done because they knew that veterans would be afraid and would lose morale easier knowing how horrific war could be. But these younger soldiers, they didn't necessarily, know what they were getting into. They didn't quite understand the gravity of the situation. The video I watched talked about how they were, pretty honest with them in the briefing. They said, you look around you, a lot of these people are not going to make it out alive. And the soldiers would look to the guy on their left, and they look to the guy on their left, and they say, "Oh, those poor guys, they're not going to make it." But they never considered themselves because they were young and they were hard-headed, and to them they couldn't die. Like one veteran in that video put it. In fact, I think I could pull it up. He said they weren't going to die, or they felt like they weren't going to die because their mothers loved them too much. Okay, yes. So this is the video that I wrote my paper on. It's by Timeline. Posting that in the chat. Also be putting that on the playlist that I have called Videos I Have Talked About, which is about videos I have talked about on the stream. Imagine that. So to better prepare the Allies' onslaught onto the beach, both there was supposed to be carpet bombing over the area to help push the offensive and to kind of level the ground. Or no, sorry, to do the opposite of that, to crater the ground so that there would be more cover for soldiers as they approach the beach, as well as shaking the German defenses. Somehow, though, the Allied planes missed their bombing runs. And so because of that, the beaches were smooth and they were open. And the Germans, of course, were well entrenched. And unlike the American soldiers being sent in, these were veteran Wehrmacht soldiers. They had experience. They were level-headed. And of course, they were a lot more comfortable than the crew that was on the offensive. It says, according to that video, in the first 6 hours following the landing at Omaha Beach, approximately 1,000 men were killed. Across 6 hours. That's insane. Let's see, what time did the invasion start? I have it written down here. I'm not quite sure. It just says in the early morning. The fighting went on, and the few Allied soldiers that managed to survive and made their way past the line of fire onto the beach found that their weapons were clogged with the sand and the seawater, which of course was just another problem to confront. And it wasn't until about 3 p.m. that there was enough of a lull in the fighting that the soldiers were allowed basic movements around the beach. So, early morning, the sun is barely up, and it takes, almost 12 hours of just nonstop fighting before there's enough for basic movement on the beach. There were plenty of heroes that came out of that. One of them was actually General Norman Dutch Coda. Despite being a general, he personally led what few troops survived to the point he had them use a Bangalore torpedo to destroy a section of a barricade, then personally led his troops through the gap and onward. So instead of just sitting back, like most generals do, he was actually there with his men. On D-Day itself, it was said that approximately 2,500 Allied soldiers died in the assault, the overwhelming majority of which met their end on Omaha Beach. And it's funny because as just awful as that scene was, as bitter as that victory was, the guys that were being interviewed for that, who were veterans, they were there, they watched their friends die. And one guy who was there, his name was Bob Slaughter. I don't even know, I doubt he's still alive, but he had talked and he had made it onto the beach and they were under fire. They couldn't do anything, completely pinned. And this other soldier turned to him. He says, "Sergeant Slaughter, are we going to die?" and he could not even answer him. Like he just was so stunned by what was going on. But the veterans who did survive, like at least in the video, as horrific as everything was, they said, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I don't regret that. So as awful as that whole situation was, sending all these young men to die and into this essentially this meat grinder, you have these people who realize that, that was the sacrifice to be made, and they don't regret doing that. Um, Anyways, that's of course horribly depressing, but what else is this stream good for? See, what else can we talk about? Oh, dang it, I closed my little notepad that I had filled with stuff. Um, so another thing, um, I finally finished the book that I was reading. As I said, I was reading a book by a local Utah author. I met him at Comic-Con. Real cool dude. He came across as kind of different from all the other people selling their books. Just something about him was different. I can't even really explain it. But he grew up in a cult, and he has his own podcast. I've talked about it a little bit on this one, and he wrote a book about his experiences called Beyond the Cabin. Great book. Finally finished it. I don't want to get too much into it because I don't want to spoil it. I did write a review for Goodreads and also for Amazon, and I also put that review on for my blog, so that'll come up eventually. I go into more detail, kind of talking about what I liked about it. But essentially, what I liked was that it was unlike like the thing is that with fiction, especially, you get they call them tropes, but there's a certain expectation, um, and real life doesn't have that. Like if something gets brought up, it's important for something. Um, so, for instance, if a character mentions, if they mention their ability to dodge bullets or whatever, it's like, okay, at some point he's going to be dodging a bullet or whatever. Or if they mention, even just something that's not directly consequential, but it's like the history of the world, like that's important to the story. And so there's this real expectation of everything that you get is important in some degree. And the problem with that is that as a reader, as a writer, as a, somebody who's familiar with tropes and writing, looking at all that, I like it. It makes a lot of things predictable, especially when it comes to genre fiction, because you're like, okay, uh, obviously this is our protagonist. Obviously he's going to live till the end of the book, no matter what conflicts come up, because that's how the story writing works. Um, this character is introduced, and the author just puts a little more detail, so you know that they're important. They're going to come up again. Something gets brought up, and you know that it's going to either be resolved, or that something's going to happen with it. That it's there in the book for a reason. But the interesting thing about Beyond the Cabin is that because it is semi-autobiographical, it's not, by the author's own admission, it's not 100% true to life. It's got a lot of what do you call it? Jeez. Artistic renderings. I don't remember what the term is, but basically there are some things where he changed it because it needed to fit in the book better. But on the whole, it's all stuff that happened to him, and like kind of his perspective on things, and so the point I'm trying to make with this is that the whole book, like, it leaves an air of uncertainty because it's not just a typical genre fiction. If a character gets introduced, your villain or your antagonist or whatever, you know that at some point they're going to be defeated. Maybe they'll be killed, or at the very least they'll be overcome, or circumvented. Um, but this book, because it's an account of the author's life, it's not bound by those rules. So I greatly appreciated Beyond the Cabin simply because it was interesting. It wasn't just like, oh, this is what happened. It was like it was written like a story, but it wasn't confined to storytelling conventions. It wasn't confined to like, okay, this is going to get introduced or this has gotten introduced, therefore this is going to happen. Things that got brought up and then came back into play were a surprise because they didn't have to come back, and it was a surprise to see it happen. And then certain things get brought up, and there's a lot of build up for them, and you think that like something's going to happen, like I won't spoil it, but there's just things, and you expect it to come to a head and to explode or to break, because that's how storytelling goes. You have to have that, not if you're writing about your life. So Beyond the Cabin is very unique in that sense. It's great. I was really invested in it, and I'll say this: it's not a perfect book because it's kind of clumsily written. But it's also because it's a coming of age tale, it kind of works because it's from the perspective of this character who's really young and naive when he starts off, and the writing is really awkward as he's like growing up and all this stuff. And then towards the end of it, when he's mature and basically an adult, um, that means that his writing becomes more clear, and things make more sense, and he's less distracted by superfluous things. So you have this very gradual shift that's not spelled out necessarily, at least not every wit and detail of it, but as a whole, um, it just kind of hits you like a ton of bricks. Kind of like how you grow up in real life and you don't notice the moment when you're an adult. You just one day you look and you realize, oh, something's changed, and it's been like that for a while, but you're only just now realizing it. So it's a brilliant little book. Definitely recommend. Um, Beyond the Cabin by Jared Nathan Garrett. Great stuff. Definitely give it a read. So now that I finally got that one finished, I'm going to try and plow through. I got a couple other books from Comic Con that I really want to read. Both of them are by like local or small authors. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully those are as good. Um, hopefully, at least. Also, Tyler, thank you for following me on Twitter. I greatly appreciate that support. I don't know how often you're on there, but I don't even use it that often because, frankly, I don't like. There's just not a lot that appeals to me on it. But it's sort of like in this day and age, having a Twitter is almost like having a business card. You kind of have to have one. But anyways, Beyond the Cabin, it's really good. Give it a read. Um, Not because it's a perfect book, but because it does what it does really well and it stands out and is very unique. At least for me, I've never read a book like it, and I really enjoyed it. And I greatly appreciate having something that's well written but unpredictable in a meaningful way. A Song of Ice and Fire, which I've rambled on about, is the same way. In not in the sense that it's autobiographical, but um, just that George R. R. Martin is really good at playing with expectations, and he knows like kind of what the audience expects, and he knows what they're not expecting, and he's really good at messing with that. And some people see through it. I'm not one of them, so I greatly appreciate it. Kimmery saying that she doesn't have a Twitter. That's okay. I don't blame you. Frankly, Twitter's not a great place to be. If I didn't think it was necessary, I probably wouldn't have one. Although, to be fair, I actually started it so I could try and talk to this girl. That didn't work out so well. So we're not going to go into that. Much like how I'm not going to go into her. Hi-yo! Anyways. There was one particular quote from Beyond the Cabin I would like to read. I'm gonna I was gonna stretch over and get my book, but maybe I'll just look at the review that I wrote since I have a copy of it on my drive. Oh, whoops. That should be in there, shouldn't it? Okay. So I wrote, so as part of the review, I headlined it with a quote from the book, which I really liked. It really struck a chord with me. It said, "How could they think that by separating themselves from the world, they could make any difference in it?" The main character is very angry about the cult and being raised in it. Um, and the cult, of course, because it's a cult, is totally detached from the world. And so I really love this line because it's in the middle of this tirade that he's going on where he's just going off about how much it's hypocritical and doesn't make sense. And that line ends up actually being more important to the story than I originally anticipated because I noticed it and I really liked the line. I was like, man, that is some grade A writing. And then it ended up being, even though it's never repeated like you might expect, it ends up being consistent with the point of the story, the purpose of it. So again, read Beyond the Cabin. Or don't, just buy it and then support this local author. Like I told Tyler, he has like 6 kids. So, he could use all the money he could get. But and the really nice thing about local authors is you can tweet them and be like, "Hey, I really liked your book," and they'll like that means the world to them. They'll be, "Oh, thank you, you made my day nice." I was like, "All right." Anyways, let me see. So Shelby, I don't know if you're listening, or if you're responding to messages, I should say. Did you finish? I know you finished that one book that you really liked. Did you start and finish any of the others? Have you started them? Have you finished them? What's been going on, Shelby? For that matter, I don't know if Tyler or Kimry have been reading anything, but if you have, feel free to talk about it in chat. One thing I'll say is I want to be a fantasy author. I have to admit though, I have not read a lot of fantasy books, and I'm afraid that might be seen as kind of a dampering. Because the idea is that you form social circles as an author, because no author succeeds just by making a book. You have to have people that are reading it, people that are recommending it, and you can start by doing that by making friends with people and be, oh hey, by the way, I wrote this book. Do you want a free copy? Kimmery says all she reads is drug prescriptions and knitting patterns. That's a that's a pretty interesting book if it contains both of those. Messing with your expectations, instead of finishing his book, he writes video game plots. Sounds like something Kojima would do. Kimmery says that wasn't good grammar. Um, that's okay. I'm not going to judge. Oh, George R. R. Martin. Okay, I thought you were talking about the Beyond the Cabin guy. I was really confused. Yeah, George R. R. Martin. I linked a video to it. In fact, I linked the video um in that blog post that went up today. And it looks like it's also on my videos I've talked about playlist. Um, George R. R. Martin, he says one of the rules for writing is that you have to learn how to finish a story, which seems obvious, but he's like, that's something I've struggled with since I was a kid. It's like, yeah, you kind of do, George. You kind of do struggle with it. I'm real. So yeah, on that note, George R. R. Martin is collaborating with From Software from Japan, who made Dark Souls, which is of course one of my favorite fantasy franchises. So my favorite fantasy author and one of my favorite video game developers are joining up to make this game that they announced officially today, and I'm really curious about it. I hope it's as good as it sounds, because well, that would just be amazing. I did not play Sekiro, unfortunately, but I heard that one was really good. I wouldn't even mind like talking about the lore of Dark Souls on here, but I don't want to turn this into a video game stream, and also it's a lot of extrapolation, and I basically have to start from the beginning because I don't remember much except the basic outline of the story. But anyways, but yeah, if you guys ever, read another story, or you're in the process of reading one and you like it, feel free to mention it on stream because I can't read all the stuff that's like out there. Obviously, I can't even read like a drop in the bucket's worth. I'm like, apparently, I'm a really slow reader just because I keep getting distracted. Um, I started my new job, like I said, and I made a point, especially because I was finishing Beyond the Cabin and I wanted to finish it, and not just talk about it. Um, I made a point to arrive early, like 30 minutes early, and just sit in my car and read while I wait for my shift to start. Excuse me, which is good. They're very strict about you clocking in exactly on time. Um, so I'm hoping that'll give me some time each day to do some reading. Tomorrow, summer school starts up. I've got classes Monday and Wednesday. Uh, it's a creative writing class, I think, or intro to imaginative writing, whatever that is. Um, hopefully, it's a good class. Hopefully, it gives me a chance to do more writing, maybe some more reading as well, because I would just absolutely love to do both. Um, Speaking of writing, I have been writing somewhat regularly. I've mentioned that I've been working a night job and that because I was getting up early, it was hard to really uh, catch up with my writing because working a night job, I get home and I'm tired. But thankfully, without even trying too hard, I found that it was really easy if I wasn't writing the night before, that I would get up and the first thing I would do in the morning is start writing. Go with orcs with a Cockney accent. Oh, I would love to do that. Cockney. But anyways, I've got I've been doing some writing. Like I said, I called to Tyler. I said it was my big boy story, which is that dark fantasy story I've been working on for a long time. It looks like Shelby's following me, so thanks for following me on Twitter, Shelby. I don't know what is up with this stream. It seems really laggy tonight. But anyways, Kimmery says she's been reading a book called My Name Used to Be Mohammed by Tito Momin, about a Muslim boy converting to Christianity and going to prison for his beliefs. Interesting. I'm assuming that's like a biography or an autobiography and not merely a novel, I would imagine. Um, oh, Tyler paused the stream. Yeah, I sometimes pause the stream, not this stream, but like streams in general, and then I'm like, wait, why did I do that? Why didn't I just like mute it? Because it's not like I need every bit of information coming out of the stream. But Kimry says she read it for sociology. I think I mentioned for the history class I had to drop, I ended up getting these two books, not textbooks, but like actual books. One's about the Erie Canal, and one's about it's called The Storm of Witchcraft. I think it's about the Salem witch trials, and I've been really curious about it. Um, Haven't read them yet. I wouldn't mind reading them at some point, but apparently I don't do a lot of reading these days. But anyways, yeah, good reading. I still haven't even finished The Lord of the Rings. Anyways, speaking of fantasy, so as I was saying, I have my book, my big boy book, which is the one I've been writing for years, and I'm really confident about it. I feel like it's a really good book, but I also don't want it to be my first book. That's kind of what I decided recently. So I had this idea to write just like these short stories that would be easy to write, and I could throw them out there, just like really push them, and just not worry about making money on them, but just really getting them out there and getting people to read them. Excuse me. I don't know if you guys heard that. Um, unfortunately, even though I've been writing pretty regularly in the mornings, which has been great, I'm glad that I've been able to do that. Um, I still feel like my progress is slow with it, which is kind of silly. Because my big boy book, like it's pretty, I consider it to be pretty intricate. There's a lot of stuff where I'm like, okay, I need to make sure that this makes sense, that this works well. And with this one, I'm this other, excuse me, it's not nearly so intricate or careful. So I'm like, okay, I should just be able to just push it out. But even that just takes me a while. And I rewrote the first couple paragraphs. Like I did one draft, and then I was like, that's not good enough. I wrote a second draft. I was like, let me fix that. So now without even finishing the other two drafts, I started on the third draft, and that's where I'm currently at. I wouldn't mind doing a reading of that eventually. I don't want to do it until at least the story I'm working on is finished. Um, although I have noticed that, like, even though I'm sure that this story has a lot of potential for something great, I'm not nearly as enthusiastic about it as I am about my big boy book. So I'd like to think that that's like an internal sign that my big boy book is really really good. I don't want to make that presumption, however, just because my big boy book. I don't want to make that assumption because I find, from what I can glean at least, typically a person's most successful writing, their most successful creation, is usually the one they don't expect. So I'll tell you a little story where I've experienced that for myself. A couple years back now, geez, it really has been a few years. Dang. I kind of wanted to be a music producer. So I bought a copy of Ableton. I had a MIDI keyboard. I was just, listening to it. Or I was making music. Every day I sat down at my computer trying to make music. Turns out I'm terrible at making music. Not nearly as good at that as I am at writing. And I'm not even, I don't consider myself to be some like uh genius in the making. Oh, I'd like to be, but anyways, the point is that so I spent a lot of time making music and all this stuff, and it was all terrible. I could come up with like little bits that were okay, but I didn't know enough about music theory and chords and progressions to really make it shine. I didn't know much about music on a technical level, so I was mostly just fiddling around with it like a toy rather than doing anything serious with it. I wanted to be serious, but I wasn't capable of it. Anyways, but one time, like I would occasionally make a song, like just a simple little song. You know what? I think I might even be able to find that. Let me, because out of all the songs I made, there was one that I was like, okay, this one actually turned out okay. Let me see if I can find it. my account was so small that I don't know if it's gonna come up. But I made one song, and I was like, you know what? This actually this is really good, or not really good, but I was like, this is actually half decent for what I can do. Yeah, I posted this song 5 years ago. Dang, really been that long. Um, but the thing was, I made this song, I posted it. I didn't think anything about it. I don't even remember making it or posting it. But I went back later and I was like, wait a minute, this actually sounds okay. So I'm gonna post the link to that. You can give it a listen. Maybe you know what? Maybe I'll just play that when I have a chance for when I go on break here in a few minutes. I'm gonna do that, but I'm also gonna post the link. So I was a terrible musician, still am. Hopefully, I'm a better writer, but SoundCloud is pretty good, by the way. There's a lot of like obscure music on there. So if you're looking for something that's not as well known or maybe not on YouTube, it's a great place to be. Man, I can't believe this stuff is still on here. I mean, I kind of can, but it's so embarrassing, you know? It's like looking over a book of uh, it's like looking over like a book of your childhood drawings that you used to think were so good, and now you're like, man, I was like a crackhead when I was a kid. Except I really was a crackhead. I wish. Then I'd have an excuse. Oh wait. Actually, I think that's the wrong one. Yeah, I posted two versions because I slightly improved the first one. There's not a huge difference, but anyways. So my point of that spiel about my life is that like your best stuff, you don't expect it, you know. Like it kind of takes you off guard. Right? Um, and I find that that's true with like writing generally. Um, so there's a movie. Don't let your memes be memes, says Kimmery. Um, I was kind of fooling myself with music. I was like, oh, you know, if I keep at this, I'll be good at it eventually. And then 2 years passed doing that day every single day, and I was like, I'm not getting any better at this. So I gave up on that. I feel like I'm really good at writing though, and apparently other people agree. So hopefully this time I've actually found something I can do. Anyways, um, when it comes to this sort of thing, there was a book, you know, years and years ago called Fight Club. It ended up being a movie, which is really good. Definitely recommend that one. So the book, the story goes that the writer Chuck Palahniuk, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. It's kind of a weird one. He had this other book, this manuscript called Invisible Monsters, which he ended up publishing later, but he took it to this publisher, and his publisher's like, no, it's too dark. We can't publish this. And so he was so mad that he ended up writing this short chapter as like kind of a taste. I don't know what they call them, a taster, just like one chapter of a supposedly new book. And he wasn't intending to really sell it. He was just like he just wanted to gross out he just wanted to get kind of this petty revenge on this guy who told him that his manuscript was too dark. So he wrote one that was even darker, took it to the same guy, and the guy's like, "Holy crap, this is great. Bring us more of this." Is okay, you know. And Fight Club ended up being his most popular thing, like by far, by a huge margin. Like it's a cultural icon now. More the movie than the book. But the point is that like he wasn't expecting that to be his magnum opus, you know. And maybe he'll come up with something better later on. I don't know. Um, and another thing is like going back to George R. R. Martin, the idea for A Song of Ice and Fire was kind of an impromptu thing. I had thought because it was so detailed that he had spent years like world building, and then he got out of writing television and was like, okay, so he spent years writing this stuff in his spare time, and then he's like, okay, now I'm gonna write my books, and that's why they're so detailed and intricate. And then as it turns out, it was actually the opposite. he had a story that he wanted to write for years and years, and once he got out of TV, uh, he was going to finally write that story because he finally had time. So he sat down and he started to write it, and he started to write it, and then as he was writing it, he got this idea for another story. And he described it. He's like, it was so vivid. I could like taste the snow and feel, all this stuff. And so he sat down. He set aside this book he had been planning to write for years, and he wrote the first chapter of Game of Thrones. And then he's like, okay, I've got something good here. Turns out he was right. Point is, he wasn't expecting that to be, the biggest moment in his career. He wasn't expecting that, and that's what ended up happening. I'm struggling to think. I'm sure there are other examples of like uh, things where people don't expect them to succeed and they kind of do. Oh, speaking of George R. R. Martin, who's teaming up with From Software, they have a reputation of doing that. Years and years ago, they released a game called Demon Souls. That was the Dark Souls before Dark Souls. The Dark Souls of Dark Souls, in fact. Um, it was just this niche little game. They weren't expecting much. It ended up being so popular that they are like, well, we have to make a sequel. So they made Dark Souls. And they weren't expecting that to be so popular. They're just like, well, okay, this and this. And they had a limited distribution of the pre-order sales, and they sold more than they had. Like they made more pre-orders than they had pre-order editions because they weren't anticipating it being so successful. And then that happened again, I think with Dark Souls 2, in fact, where they sold out of the pre-order editions. So it's kind of this funny little thing where it's like it's not what you expect is going to be popular that ends up popular. It's always the thing you don't expect. So for me, like it's kind of a funny feeling because I have this story that I've been working on for years, and I feel like it's really good, and I feel like it's really going to have an impact. But at the same time, I look at it, I'm like, I don't know that for sure, because even if it's as good as I think it is, given what I know about this weird sort of dramatic irony, if you will, um, it's probably not going to be what people consider to be my best. You know, I could write it, and then people are like, oh, this is okay. But then it's like later on, I write some story, and I don't even think about it. I just put it out. Maybe I don't even remember writing it, and somebody picks it up and is like, oh, this is amazing, and then that ends up being the most popular thing I ever write. And I'm just sitting there like, I don't get it. I don't know why this is popular. Hopefully, I mean, you hope you're so popular that you have no idea what the heck happened. Probably not, though. We'll see. But I wonder about that a lot. And it seems like, especially because like a lot of artists are only appreciated once they die. Um, and so I almost wonder if it's like some like unspoken law in the universe where like the more you want something to succeed, the less it will. But then when that moment when that expectation just dies along with you, then suddenly it's successful. I don't know what kind of universal law that would be, why that would be in place if there is such a law. But it is interesting to note. So, anyways, I'm going to take a break, and we're going to listen to that song on stream. I promise it's not bad. Like I said, it's the best song I've ever written. Just isn't saying much, admittedly, but it is what it is. So, anyways, I'll be right back. Enjoy. This is 1,000 Mile High Club. Yeah, I'm not exactly Mozart, but that's okay. I forget like that song. I'm proud of it because it's like way better than anything else I made. But at the same time, I listen to it now. I'm like, man, this is so cheesy. But stuff was it was fun to mess around with that stuff. But so while I was on my little break, I was thinking. Speaking of music, actually, um, there was. I remember reading about this guy. I don't remember his name. He wanted to be a musician, and he made one album, and it's expensive to actually put out an album. You know, it takes a lot of money to be in the studio and do the recording and all that stuff. Um, he put it out there, didn't do very well, so he gave up, and went to his normal day job. And it was something like 20 years later that he found out that his music was like that one album he did was really popular in South Africa. Just South Africa, like nowhere else. But it was popular enough that like it rebound his career and he was able to make money off of it. Like just this one country liked him so much. And like so it goes back into that whole thing about how like it seems like success usually isn't where you think it'll be for whatever reason. It's a very strange paradigm. I don't even know if that's the proper use of that word, but I like saying it because it makes me sound smart. Yeah, okay. A paradigm is a typical example or pattern or something. So I guess that would be correct. So I am smart. See? I can correctly use a word without knowing its exact definition. That's how you know I'm smart. I'll say this: I spent a couple years writing music, and it was terrible. But in comparison, like with music, I was a square peg trying to fit a round hole. Still trying to fit a round hole. But the thing about writing is that it's a much more natural fit. I won't necessarily say that like I'm gonna be a successful writer, but I'm to such an extent where like I enjoy writing so much that I'm okay with not being a successful writer. I would like to be. I spend a lot of time and hard work in this writing, and I think I have a lot of talent, but only time will tell, I guess. So, fingers crossed, buttholes clenched, uh, do or die, let's ride. Okay, so we're gonna go back to reading um, a bit of fairy tales. Uh, we read some on the stream previously. I think I'd like to start with things that are a little more popular, so I can put videos of that. Hopefully, because like kids when they're on YouTube, they don't look up fairy tales. They look up like Fortnite, Minecraft memes or unboxing videos or those weird like psychedelic stuff that really look like it's out of some sort of science fiction movie where they're just trying to be as weird as possible in order to make the world seem that much more alien. Uh, People keep texting. Beverage. Okay, so my brother's texting me about um, that new George R. R. Martin game, the From Software game, called what the heck is it called? Elden Ring. The art style seems a little weird so far from the trailer that they put out. Um, I'm sure it'll be a fun game, but whatever. So apparently, both Miyazaki, who's the big brain behind Dark Souls and Bloodborne, um, He mentioned a book called Fever Dream. It's spelled Fevre. It looks like. And my brother is saying that a podcast that talks about Game of Thrones has mentioned that book as well. I'm gonna look that up. Oh, it's okay. It's a George R. R. Martin novel. Got a average of 4 stars on Amazon and Goodreads. Ugh, ugh, I'm dying. Interesting. Apparently, it's a vampire novel. So maybe at some point I'll be able to look at that. Anyways, fairy tales. Yes, popular ones. Let's see. Everybody loves Smelly Mountain. Yeah, I love smelly mountains. That's why I live in Utah. I'm going to start off, I think, with. Okay, so there's Rapunzel and there's Sleeping Beauty. I'm going to start off with those because those are popular. I know, Kimmery, you really want Mrs. Tiddlywinks again. Maybe at some point. It's going to be the last time I read it on stream, though. So, savor it. Rapunzel. Hmm. I don't want to use anything that's like copyrighted, at least not in recent years. Um, the only problem is that looking up Rapunzel, it's mostly like Disney and Disney fan art. I'm a clever boy. Put me in, huh? Put me in that. Put me in that. The concept art, by the way, for uh, some of the Disney movies, like Beauty and the Beast, is really good. Like not just I like that concept art, but like dang, that's cool. At least I think it is. Before last stream, I was able to use an image by Paul Gustave Doré, one of my favorite artists. I don't know if he ever did anything for Rapunzel though. Let's see, fine art. You know what? Let me try Grim Fairy Tale. It's spelled with 2 M's, by the way. Grim. That one's kind of cool. I wonder if that one's Granger. I don't know who that is. Set that one aside. I have a kind of a special place in my heart for a good fairy tale, because apparently I'm secretly a little girl in addition to being a crackhead. Um, I don't know. Fairy tales just have this like, well, magic really. They just have sort of this magic to them. This purity to them. I think I'll use that one. That one looks old enough. Uh, Whack. wonder if the name Rapunzel means anything. That's not going to be aligned right, but I don't want to spend all night adjusting it either. Rapunzel name meaning. Let's see. See if we can find a name for it though. It says the meaning of it is unknown, but it's possibly related to the Germanic word for light purple flower. Interesting. Kimray's saying it's a vegetable. I think that's Sleeping Beauty, actually. She's a vegetable. Let's see, page 93. Have you ever read the actual story? I read it on stream. You would know that, Kimry, if you actually paid attention instead of just demanding tiddlywinks like some kind of pervert and then making puns. I was going to say making bad puns, but it's kind of redundant. I hope that's good enough. Story of my life. I never actually saw Tangled, by the way, because I don't have any children, and it would be really weird for me to be sitting in that theater. I don't want to go buy it. 'Cause who does that? Who buys movies? Not me. Anyways, so this is this is Rapunzel. There once lived a man and his wife. Oh wait, actually no. Dang it. There once lived a man and his wife who had long wished for a child, but in vain. Now there was at the back of their house a little window which overlooked a beautiful garden full of the finest vegetables and flowers. But there was a high wall all around it, and no one ventured into it, for it belonged to a witch of great might, of whom all the world was afraid. One day, when the wife was standing at the window and looking into the garden, she saw a bed filled with the finest rampion, and it looked so fresh and green that she began to wish for some, and at length she longed for it greatly. This went on for days, and as she knew she could not get the rampion, she pined away and grew pale and miserable. Then the man was uneasy and asked, "What is the matter, dear wife?" "Oh," answered she, "I shall die unless I have some of that rampion to eat that grows in the garden at the back of our house." The man, who loved her very much, thought to himself, "Rather than lose my wife, I will get some rampion, cost what it will." So in the twilight he climbed over the wall into the witch's garden, plucked a hasty handful of rampion, and brought it to his wife. She made a salad of it at once, and ate of it to her heart's content. But she liked it so much, and it tasted so good, that the next day she longed for it thrice as much as she had done the day before. If she was to have any rest, the man must climb over the wall once again. So he went in the twilight again, and as he was climbing back, he saw, all at once, the witch standing before him, and was terribly frightened, as she cried with angry eyes, "How dare you climb into my garden like a thief, and steal my rampion? It shall be the worse for you." "Oh," answered he, "be merciful rather than just. I have only done it through necessity, for my wife saw your rampion out of the window, and became possessed with so great a longing that she would have died if she could not have had some to eat." Then the witch said, if it is all as you say, you may have as much rampion as you like, on one condition. The child that will come into the world must be given to me. It shall go well with the child, and I will care for it like a mother." In his distress of mind, the man promised everything. And when the time came when the child was born, the witch appeared, and, giving the child the name of Rapunzel, which is the same as rampion, she took it away with her. Rapunzel was the most beautiful child in the world. When she was 12 years old, the witch shut her up in a tower in the midst of a wood, and it had neither steps nor door, only a small window above. When the witch wished to be let in, she would stand below and would cry, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your long hair." Rapunzel had beautiful long hair that shone like gold. When she heard the voice of the witch, she would undo the fastening of the upper window, unbind the plaits of her hair, and let it down 20 ells below, and the witch would climb up by it. After they had lived thus a few years, it came that as the king's son was riding through the wood, he came to the tower, and as he drew near he heard a voice singing so sweetly that he stood still and listened. It was Rapunzel in her loneliness, trying to pass away the time with sweet songs. The king's son wished to go in to her, and sought to find a door in the tower, but there was none. So he rode home, and the song had entered into his heart, and every day he went into the wood and listened to it. Once, as he was standing there under a tree, he saw the witch come up and listened while she called out, "Oh, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your long hair." Then he saw how Rapunzel let down her long tresses, and how the witch climbed up by them and went in to her. And he said to himself, "Since that is the ladder, I will climb it and seek my fortune." And the next day, as soon as it began to grow dusk, he went to the tower and cried, "Oh, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your long hair." And she let down her hair, and the king's son climbed up by it. Rapunzel was greatly terrified when she saw that a man had come into her, for she had never seen one before. But the king's son began speaking so kindly to her, and told her how her singing had entered into his heart, so that he could have no peace until he had seen her herself. Then Rapunzel forgot her terror, and when he asked her to take him for her husband, she saw that he was young and beautiful. She thought to herself, "I certainly like him better than old Mother Gothel." She put her hand into his hand, saying, "I would willingly go with you, but I do not know how I shall get out. When you come, bring each time a silken rope, and I will make a ladder, and when it is quite ready, I will get down by it out of the tower, and you shall take me away on your horse." They agreed that he should come to her every evening, as the old woman came in the daytime. So the witch knew nothing of all this, until once Rapunzel said to her unwittingly, "Mother Gothel, how is it that you climb up here so slowly, and the king's son is with me in a moment?" "Oh, wicked child!" cried the witch, "what is this I hear? I thought I had hidden you from all the world, and you have betrayed me." In her anger she seized Rapunzel by her beautiful hair, struck her several times with her left hand, then grasping a pair of shears in her right, snip, snip, the beautiful locks of hair lay on the ground. And she was so hard-hearted that she took Rapunzel and put her in a waste and desert place, where she lived in great woe and misery. The same day on which she took Rapunzel away, she went back to the tower in the evening, and made fast the several locks of hair to the window hasp. And the king's son came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your long hair." Then she let her hair down, and the king's son climbed up. But instead of his dearest Rapunzel, he found the witch looking at him with wicked, glittering eyes. "Aha!" cried she, mocking him. "You came for your darling, but the sweet bird sits no longer in the nest, and sings no more. The cat has got her, and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will see her no more." The king's son was beside himself with grief, and in his agony he sprang from the tower. He escaped with life, but the thorns on which he fell pulled out his eyes. Then he wandered blind through the wood, eating nothing but roots and berries, and doing nothing but lamenting and weeping for the loss of his dearest wife. So he wandered several years in misery, until at last he came to the desert place, where Rapunzel lived with her twin children she had borne, a boy and a girl. At first he heard a voice that he thought he knew, and when he reached the place from which it seemed to come, Rapunzel knew him, and fell on his neck and wept. And when her tears touched his eyes, they became clear again, and he could see with them as well as ever. Then he took her to his kingdom, where he was received with great joy, and there they lived long and happily. Classic story of Rapunzel, of a girl who's completely naive, being uh, taken advantage of. For the kids. All right, now let's move on to Sleeping Beauty. Oh, I like this one. Hopefully this one isn't copyright. If it is, I'm sorry, whoever owns this image. Anyways. It's not particularly high resolution, unfortunately, but I do like it. Looks nice. Alright. Sleeping Beauty, I think, is a little longer, but shouldn't be a problem, I don't think. Oh, actually, no, it looks like it's shorter. That's interesting. Probably move on to Hansel and Gretel once I do that. Hansel and Gretel. Stuff. Alright, Sleeping Beauty. Here we go. In times past there lived a king and queen who said to each other every day of their lives, "Would that we had a child," and yet they had none. But it happened once that when the queen was bathing, there came a frog out of the water, and he squatted on the ground and said to her, "Thy wish shall be fulfilled. Before a year has gone by, thou shalt bring a daughter into the world." And as the frog foretold, so it happened. And the queen bore a daughter so beautiful that the king could not contain himself for joy, and he ordained a great feast. Not only did he bid to his relations, friends, and acquaintances, but also the wise women, that they might be kind and favorable to the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but as he had only provided 12 golden plates for them to eat, one of them had to be left out. However, the feast was celebrated with all splendor, and as it drew to an end, the wise women stood forward to present to the child their wonderful gifts. One bestowed virtue, one beauty, a third riches, and so on. Whatever there is in the world to wish for, she was granted it. And when 11 of them had their say, in came the uninvited 13th, burning to revenge herself, and without greeting or respect she cried with a loud voice, "In the 15th year of her age, the princess shall prick herself with a spindle, and shall fall down dead." And without speaking one more word, she turned away and left the hall. Everyone was terrified at her saying, when the 12th came forward, for she had not bestowed her gift, and though she could not do away with the evil prophecy, yet she could soften it. So she said, "The princess shall not die, but fall into a deep sleep for 100 years." Now the king, being desirous of saving his child even from this misfortune, gave commandment that all the spindles in the kingdom should be burnt up. The maiden grew up, adorned with all the gifts of the wise women, and she was so lovely, modest, sweet, and kind and clever that no one who saw her could help but love her. It happened one day, she already being 15 years old, that the king and queen rode abroad, and the maiden was left behind alone in the castle. She wandered about into all the nooks and corners, and into all the chambers and parlours, as the fancy took her, till at last she came to an old tower. She climbed the winding stair which led to a little door, with a rusty key sticking out of the lock. She turned the key, and the door opened, and there, in the little room, sat an old woman with a spindle, diligently spinning her flax. "Good evening, mother," said the princess. "What are you doing?" "I am spinning," answered the old woman, nodding her head. "What thing is that twists round so briskly?" asked the maiden, and taking the spindle into her hand she began to spin. But no sooner had she touched it than the evil prophecy was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger with it. In that very moment she fell back upon the bed that stood there, and lay in a deep sleep. And this sleep fell upon the whole castle. The king and queen, who had returned and were in the great hall, fell fast asleep, and with them the whole court. The horses in their stalls, the dogs in their yard, the pigeons on the roof, the flies on the wall, the very fire that flickered on the hearth, became still, and slept like all the rest. And the meat on the spit ceased roasting, and the cook, who was going to pull the scullion's hair for some mistake he had made, let him go, and went to sleep. And the wind ceased, and not a leaf fell from the trees about the castle. Then round about that place there grew a hedge of thorns thicker every year, until at last the whole castle was hidden from view, and nothing of it could be seen but the vane on the roof. And a rumour went abroad in all that country of the beautiful sleeping Rosamond, for so the princess was called. And from time to time many kings' sons came and tried to force their way through the hedge, but it was impossible for them to do so, for the thorns held fast together like strong hands, and the young men were caught by them, and not being able to get free, there died a lamentable death. Many a long year afterwards there came a king's son into that country, and heard an old man tell how there should be a castle standing up behind the hedge of thorns, and that there a beautiful enchanted princess named Rosamond had slept for 100 years, and with her the king and queen and the whole court. The old man had been told by his grandfather that many kings' sons had sought to pass the thorn hedge, but had been caught and pierced by the thorns, and had died miserable deaths. Then said the young man, "Nevertheless, I do not fear to try. I shall win through and see the lovely Rosamond." The good old man tried to dissuade him, but he would not listen to his words. Now the 100 years were at an end, and the day had come when Rosamond should be awakened. When the prince drew near the hedge of thorns, it was changed into a hedge of beautiful large flowers, which parted and bent aside to let him pass, and then closed behind him in a thick hedge. When he reached the castle yard, he saw the horses and brindled hunting dogs lying asleep, and on the roof the pigeons were sitting with their heads under their wings. And when he came indoors, the flies on the walls were asleep. The cook in the kitchen had his hand uplifted to strike the scullion, and the kitchen maid had the black fowl on her lap, ready to pluck. Then he mounted higher, and saw in the hall the whole court lying asleep, and above them on their thrones slept the king and the queen. And still he went farther, and all was so quiet that, that he could hear his own breathing, and at last he came to the tower, and went up the winding stair, and opened the door of the little room where Rosamond lay. And when he saw her looking so lovely in her sleep, he could not turn away his eyes, and presently he stooped and kissed her, and she awaked, and opened her eyes, and looked very kindly on him. And she rose, and they went forth together. The king and the queen and the whole court woke up, and gazed on each other with great eyes of wonderment. And the horses in the yard got up and shook themselves. The hounds sprang up and wagged their tails. The pigeons on the roof drew their heads from under their wings, looked around, and flew into the field. The flies on the walls crept up on a little farther. The kitchen fire leapt up and blazed, and cooked the meat. The joint on the spit began to roast. The cook gave the scullion such a box in the ear that he roared out, and the maid went on plucking the fowl. Then the wedding of the prince and Rosamond was held with all splendor, and they lived happily together until their lives' end. Kimmery's saying that flax is interesting because when you spin it, it attaches. It only attaches when wet, so you wet it while spinning it. It means they don't wash it prior to spinning. Interesting. I don't know anything about sewing because I'm a man. That's why I read fairy tales in my spare time. Ugh, I almost feel like I need another break. I'll be all right. It's kind of an interesting idea for a story. Because with these fairy tales, you'd think the idea was that parents tell them to their kids just because they want their kids, to learn a lesson or something. I guess some of them are probably for entertainment, but it's like, is there a lesson to be learned here? It's just that if you want a woman, you got to wake her up or something. I don't know. Like, how does that, what do we do here? Well, fun stuff. I mean, there is kind of that weird implication about the prince being you can overcome a bad situation by sleeping a lot and having a cute boy kiss you. Done. For me, I just like fantasy, I like the sense of fantasia, really, that comes with fairy tales. Sleeping Beauty is good for that. That's all I'm in for, and that's usually all I get. Well, what else can you do? Hansel and Gretel, I know, is a bit longer. Should be okay though. All right, Hansel and Gretel. It is kind of funny how, a lot of people want to kind of guard their kids from anything that's too extreme, too dark, or whatever. But then you look at all these old school fairy tales, and they're just like so metal. People being burned alive or dying in a thicket of thorns. It's like it still kind of goes on sometimes. That movie Gremlins. Like I watched a little bit of that when I was really really little, way too young for that movie, and it traumatized me. Um, but even now, like I went back to watch it, and I was like, this is disturbing. I can't stomach this. Maybe I'm just a big pansy. I mean, I know I am, but I'm definitely a big pansy. We're just gonna use the Wikipedia image for Hansel and Gretel. Hansel. I always just think of I don't even think of the fairy tale anymore. I just think of Derek Zoolander. I can dare it my own. Thank you. Two pelicans. All right. Who knew that reading was so much work? Okay, this is Hansel and Gretel. Near a great forest there lived a poor woodcutter and his wife and his two children. The boy's name was Hansel and the girl's Gretel. They had very little to bite or to sup, and once, when there was a great dearth in the land, the men could not even gain the daily bread. As he lay in bed one night thinking of this, and tossing and turning, he sighed heavily and said to his wife, "What will become of us? We cannot even feed our children. There is nothing left for ourselves." "I will tell you what, husband," answered the wife. "We will take the children early in the morning into the forest, where it is thickest. We will make them a fire, and we will give them each a piece of bread. Then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will never find the way home again, and we shall be quit of them." "No, wife," said the man, "I cannot do that. I cannot find in my heart to take my women into the forest and leave them there alone. The wild animals would soon come and devour them." "Oh, you fool," said she, "then we will all four starve. You had better get the coffins ready." And then she left him no peace until he consented. "But I really pity the poor children," said the man. The two children had not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitterly, and said to Hansel, "It is all over for us." "Do be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel, "and do not fret. I will manage something." And when the parents had gone to sleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the back door, and slipped out. The moon was shining brightly. The white flints that lay in front of the house glistened like pieces of silver. Hansel stooped and filled the little pockets of his coat as full as it could hold. Then he went back again and said to Gretel, "Be easy, dear little sister, and go to sleep quietly. God will not forsake us," and laid himself down again in his bed. When the day was breaking, and before the sun had risen, the wife came and awakened the two children, saying, get up, you lazy bones! We are going into the forest to cut wood." And then she gave each of them a piece of bread, and said, "That is for dinner, and you must not eat it before then, for you will get no more." Gretel carried the bread under her apron, for Hansel had his pockets full of the flints. Then they all set off together on their way into the Black Forest. When they had gone a little way, Hansel stood still and looked back toward the house, and this he did again and again till his father said to him, "Hansel, what are you looking at? Take care not to forget your legs." "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I am looking at my little white kitten, who is sitting up on the roof to bid me good-bye." "You young fool," said the woman, "that is not your kitten, that is the sunshine on the chimney-pot." Of course, Hansel had not been looking at his kitten, but had been taking every now and then a flint from his pocket and dropping it on the road. When they reached the middle of the forest, the father told the children to collect wood, to make a fire to keep them warm. Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood, enough for a little mountain, and it was set on fire. And when the flame was burning quite high, the wife said, "Now lie down by the fire and rest yourselves, you children, and we will go and cut wood, and when we are ready we will come and fetch you." So Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and at noon they each ate their pieces of bread. They thought their father was in the wood all the time, but as they seemed to hear the strokes of the axe, it was really only a dry branch hanging to a withered tree that the wind moved to and fro. So when they had stayed there a long time, their eyelids closed with weariness, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they woke, it was night, and Gretel began to cry, and said, "How will we ever get out of this wood?" But Hansel comforted her, and said, "Wait a little while longer, until the moon rises, and then we can easily find the way home." And when the full moon got up, Hansel took his little sister by the hand, and followed the way where the flint stones shone like silver, and showed them the road. They walked on the whole night through, and at the break of day they came to their father's home. They knocked at the door, and when the wife opened it and saw it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, why did you sleep so long in the wood? We thought you were never coming home again." For the father was glad, for it had gone to his heart to leave them both in the woods alone. Not very long after, there was again great scarcity in those parts, and the children heard their mother say at night in bed to their father, "Everything is finished up. We have only half a loaf, and even that, and after that the tale comes to an end. The children must be off, and we will take them farther into the woods this time, so they shall not be able to find the way back again." There was no other way to manage. The man felt sad at heart, and he thought it would be better to share one's last morsel with one's children. But the wife would listen to nothing that he said, but scolded and reproached him. He who says A must say B too, and when a man has given in once, he has to do it a second time. But the children were not asleep, and had heard all the talk. And when the parents had gone to sleep, Hansel got up and to go out and get more flintstones, as he did before. But the wife had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. But he comforted his little sister and said, "Don't cry, Gretel, and go to sleep quietly, and God will help us." Early the next morning the wife came and pulled the children out of bed. She gave them each a little piece of bread, less than before, and on the way to the wood, Hansel crumbled the bread in his pocket, and often stopped to throw a crumb on the ground. "Hansel, what are you stopping behind and staring for?" said the father. "I am looking at my little pigeon sitting on the roof to say good-bye to me," answered Hansel. "You fool," said the wife, "that is no pigeon, but the morning sun shining on the chimney pots." Hansel went on as before, and strewed breadcrumbs all along the road. The woman led the children far into the wood, where they had never before been in all their lives. And again there was a large fire made, and the mother said, "Sit still there, you children, and when you are tired you can go to sleep. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening when we are ready to go home we will come and fetch you." So when noon came, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, who had strewn his all along the road. And when they went to sleep and the evening passed, and no one came for the poor children. When they awoke it was dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister, and said, "Wait a little, Gretel, until the moon gets up, then we shall be able to see the way home by the crumbs of bread I have scattered along it." So when the moon rose they got up, but they could find no crumbs of bread, for the birds of the woods and of the fields had come and picked them up. Hansel thought they might find the way all the same, but they could not. They went on all the night, and the next day, from the morning until the evening, they could not find the way out of the wood, and they were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but the few berries they could pick up. And when they were so tired they could no longer drag themselves along, they lay down under a tree and fell asleep. It was now the third morning since they had left their father's house, and they were always trying to get back to it, but instead of that they found themselves only farther into the wood. And if help had not soon come, they would have starved. Around noon they saw a pretty snow-white bird sitting on a bough, and singing so sweetly that they stopped to listen. And when he had finished, the bird spread his wings and flew before them, and they followed after him until they came to a little house, and the bird perched on the roof. And when they came near they saw that the house was built of bread, and roofed with cakes, and the windows was of transparent sugar. "We will have some of this," said Hansel, "and make a fine meal. I will have a piece of the roof, Gretel, and you can have some of the window. That will taste sweet." So Hansel reached up and broke off a bit of the roof, just to see how it tasted, and Gretel stood by the window and gnawed at it, and when they heard then they heard a thin voice call out from inside, "Nibble, nibble, nibble, nibble like a mouse. Who is nibbling at my house?" And the children answered, "Never mind, it is the wind." And they went on eating, never disturbing themselves. Hansel, who found that the roof tasted very nice, took down a great piece of it, and Gretel pulled out a large round window pane and sat her down and began upon it. Then the door opened, and an aged woman came out, leaning upon a crutch. Hansel and Gretel felt very frightened, and let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Ah, my dear children, how come you here? You must come indoors and stay with me. You will be in no trouble." So she took them each by the hand and led them into her little house, and there they found a good meal laid out of milk and pancakes, with sugar, apples, and nuts. And after that she showed them two little white beds, and Hansel and Gretel laid themselves down on them and thought they were in heaven. The old woman, although her behavior was so kind, was a wicked witch who lay in wait for the children and had built the little house on purpose to entice them. When they were once inside, she used to kill them, cook them, and eat them, and then it was feast day for her. The witch's eyes were red, and she could not see very far, but she had a keen scent like the beasts, and knew very well when human creatures were near. When she knew that Hansel and Gretel were coming, she gave a spiteful laugh and said triumphantly, "I have them, and they shall not escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she got up to look at them, and as they lay sleeping so peacefully with round rosy cheeks, she said to herself, "What a fine feast I shall have!" Then she grasped Hansel with her withered hand, and led him to a little stable, and shut him behind a grating, and call and scream as he might, it was no good. Then she went back to Gretel and shook her, crying, "Get up, lazy bones! Fetch water, and cook something nice for your brother. He is outside in the stable, and must be fattened up, and when he is fat enough, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was no use. She had to do what the wicked witch bade her. And so the best kind of victuals was cooked for poor Hansel, while Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Each morning the old woman visited the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger, that I may tell if you will soon be fat enough." Hansel, however, used to hold out a little bone, and the old woman, who had weak eyes, could not see what it was, and supposing it to be Hansel's finger, wondered very much that it was not getting fatter. When 4 weeks had passed, and Hansel seemed to remain so thin, she lost patience and could wait no longer. "Now then, Gretel," cried she to the little girl, "be quick and draw water. Be Hansel fat or be he lean, tomorrow I must cook him." Oh, what grief for the poor little sister to have fetched water, and how the tears flowed down over her cheek. "Dear God, pray help us," cried she. "If we had been devoured by wild beasts in the wood, at least we should have died together." "Spare me your lamentations," said the old woman. "They are of no avail." Early, early next morning, Gretel had to get up, make the fire, and fill the kettle. "First we will do the baking," said the old woman. "I have heated the oven already, and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel toward the oven, out of which the flames were already shining. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly hot, so that the bread may be baked." And Gretel, once in, she meant to shut the door upon her, and let her be baked. And then she would have eaten her, but Gretel perceived her intention, and said, "I don't know how to do it. How shall I get in?" "Stupid goose," said the old woman, "the opening is big enough, do you see? I could get in myself." She stooped down and put her head in the oven's mouth. Then Gretel gave her a push so that she went in further. Then she shut the iron door behind her and put up the bar. Oh, how frightfully she howled! But Gretel ran away, and left the wicked witch to burn miserably. Gretel went straight to Hansel, opened the stable door, and cried, "Hansel, we are free! The old witch is dead!" Then out flew Hansel like a bird from its cage as soon as the door is opened. How rejoiced they both were! How they fell each on each other's necks and danced about and kissed each other! And as they had nothing more to fear, they went over all the old witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests of pearls and precious stones. "This is something better than flintstones," said Hansel as he filled his pockets, and Gretel, thinking she would also like to carry something home with her, filled her apron full. "Now away we go," said Hansel, "if we can only get out of the witch's wood." When they had journeyed a few hours, they came to a great piece of water. "We will never get across this. I see no stepping stones and no bridge." "And there is no boat either," said Gretel. "But here comes a white duck. If I ask her, she will help us over." So she cried, "Duck, duck, here we stand, Hansel and Gretel on the land. Stepping stones and bridge we lack, carry us over on your nice white back." And the duck came accordingly, and Hansel got upon her, and told his sister to come too. "No," answered Gretel, "that would be too hard upon the duck. We can go separately, one after the other." And that was how it was managed. And after they went on happily until they came to the wood, and the way grew more and more familiar, till at last they saw in the distance their father's house. Then they ran till they came up to it, and rushed in at the door, and fell upon their father's necks. The man had not had a quiet hour since he left his children in the wood, for the wife was dead. And when Gretel opened up her apron, pearls and precious stones were scattered all over the room. And Hansel took one handful after another out of his pockets. Then was all care at an end, and they lived happily in great joy together. Sing every one, my story is done, and look round the house, there runs a little mouse. He that can catch her before she scampers in may make himself a fur cap out of her skin. That, don't really understand that ending, but okay. Less than 10 minutes before we hit the 2 hour mark. Or I guess a little more than 10 minutes technically, but certainly counting down. That story in and of itself was almost 15 minutes. It's kind of long for one of these. I already read Little Red Riding Hood. Fox and the Geese. The Maiden Without Hands. That's a good one. Kimray had suggested that one. That one is definitely great. It's a little long though, so I'm gonna wait to read that another time. You know what? Rumpelstiltskin's kind of short, isn't it? Yeah, 3 pages. I think we can do that. And the nice thing about Rumpelstiltskin is that because it's not some Disney princess thing, it's much easier to find a good image for it. Oh, that image is a higher resolution than the other ones. All right, last story for tonight, Rumpelstiltskin. That's a good one. 236, according to this. Yep, much shorter. Much like Rumpelstiltskin, in fact. Okay. There was once a miller who was poor, but he had one beautiful daughter. It happened one day that he came to speak with the king, and to give himself consequence, he told him that he had a daughter who could spin gold out of straw. The king said to the miller, "This is an art that pleases me well. If your daughter is as clever as you say, bring her to my castle tomorrow, that I may put her to the proof." When the girl was brought to him, he led her into a room that was quite full of straw, and gave her a wheel and a spindle, and said, "Now set to work, and if by the early morning you have not spun this straw to gold, you shall die." And he shut the door himself and left her there all alone. And so the poor miller's daughter was left there sitting, and could not think what to do for her life. She had no notion how to set to work to spin gold from straw, and her distress grew so great that she began to weep. Then all at once the door opened, and in came a little man, who said, "Good evening, miller's daughter. Why are you crying?" "Oh," answered the girl, "I have got to spin gold out of straw, and I don't understand the business." Then the little man said, "What will you give me if I spin it for you?" My necklace," said the girl. The little man took the necklace, seated himself before the wheel, and whir, 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 3 times round, and the bobbin was full. Then he took up another, and whir, 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 3 times round, and that was full. And so he went on till the morning, when all the straw had been spun, and all the bobbins were full of gold. At sunrise came the king, and when he saw the gold, he was astonished and very much rejoiced, for he was very avaricious. He had the miller's daughter taken into another room filled with straw, much bigger than the last, and told her that as she valued her life, she must spin it all in one night. The girl did not know what to do, and so she began to cry. And then the door opened, and the little man appeared, and said, "What will you give me if I spin all this straw into gold?" The ring from my finger," answered the girl. So the little man took the ring, and began again to send the wheel whirring about. And by the next morning all the straw was spun to glistening gold. The king rejoiced beyond measure at the sight. But as he could never have enough of gold, he had the miller's daughter taken into a still larger room full of straw, and said, "This too must be spun in one night, and if you accomplish it, you shall be my wife." For he thought, "Although she is but a miller's daughter, I am not likely to find anyone richer in the whole world." And so, as soon as the girl was left alone, the little man appeared for the 3rd time, and said, "What will you give me if I spin the straw for you this time?" "I have nothing left to give," answered the girl. "Then you must promise me the first child you have after you are queen," said the little man. "But who knows whether that will happen?" thought the girl. But as she did not know what else to do in her necessity, she promised the little man what he desired, upon which he began to spin, until all the straw was gold. And when in the morning the king came and found all done according to his wish, he caused the wedding to be held at once, and the miller's pretty daughter became a queen. In a year's time she brought a fine child into the world, and thought no more of the little man. But one day he came suddenly into her room and said, "Now give me what you promised me." The queen was terrified greatly, and offered the little man all the riches of the kingdom if he would only leave the child. But the little man said, "No, no, I would rather have something living than all the treasures in the world." Then the queen began to lament and to weep, so that the little man had pity upon her. "I will give you 3 days," said he, "and if at the end of it you can tell me my name, then you will keep your child. But if you cannot, you must give him to me." Then the queen spent the whole night in thinking over all the names that she had ever heard, and sent a messenger throughout the land to ask far and wide for all the names that could be found. And when the little man came next day, beginning with Caspar, Melicor, Balthazar, she repeated all the names she knew and went through the whole list. But after each, the little man said, "That is not my name." The second day the queen sent to inquire of all the neighbors what the servants were called, and told the little man all the most unusual and singular names. "Perhaps you are roast ribs, or sheep shanks, or spindle shanks?" But he answered nothing but, "That is not my name." The third day the messenger came back and said, "I have not been able to find one single new name, but as I passed through the woods I came to a high hill, and near it was a little house, and before the house burned a fire, and round the fire danced a comical little man. He hopped on one leg and cried, 'Today I bake, tomorrow I brew, the day after that the queen's child comes in, and oh, I am glad that nobody knew that the name I am called is Rumpelstiltskin.'" You cannot think how pleased the queen was to hear that name, and soon afterwards, when the little man walked in and said, "Now, Mrs. Queen, what is my name?" she said at first, "Are you called Jack?" "No," answered he. "Are you called Harry?" She asked again. "No," answered he. Then she said, "Then perhaps your name is Rumpelstiltskin." "The devil told you that! The devil told you that!" cried the little man, and in his anger he stamped his right foot so hard that it went through into the ground above his knee. Then he seized his left foot with both his hands in such a fury that he split in two, and there was an end of him. Shelby wants to give out a shout out to Johnny Depp because today is his birthday. Shout out to you, Johnny Depp. I know you're my biggest fan. You don't have to admit it, but we all know it's true. So, happy birthday, you sod. I was going to say something mean, but that's not right. Well, it's been a long stream. We've had friends, we've had enemies, and we've had frenemies. And we've had Johnny Depp. But thank you all for joining me. It's always great to have you guys on here. But again, be sure to appreciate you guys following the Twitter account and all that. If you guys find books that you like, feel free to mention them on stream. We'll talk. Maybe we can talk about them. Hopefully, I'll be able to plow through the next book that I have, which is called Jane Doe 17 by Kaylin Gardner. I don't know what it's about. It looks like it's some kind of horror story. Kind of interested, so we'll see how that goes. But anyways, next time we'll be on the stream. We can hang out, see where things go, do whatever. I'm gonna go before I make this even weirder than it already is. But thanks for coming out as usual. Hope you guys have a good week. Hope you have a good night. Thanks again for all your support. I'm not gonna say I love you because I don't want to commit to that. But we're good friends, so good luck.